Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today, we're going beyond the surface of internet culture, and we're diving deep into a recording of a Twitter space. You can think of it kind of like, well, imagine tuning into a conversation, like the kind that unfolds with this raw, totally unfiltered energy, like a digital town square. And trust me, this is one for the books.
Absolutely. And this isn't just about like who's saying what online. This Twitter space recording, what's fascinating about it is it gives us a look into the underbelly of these online communities. We're talking about like power dynamics, how these social hierarchies actually get formed and then how they're enforced online. And then there's the whole thing about like that fine line between the personas people have online versus how they behave in the real world.
So, right from the start, it's like we're thrown into this audio chat. It seems to be centered around gaming and streaming culture. We hear names like Cheezer, Blurry, even Sam Bond just kind of thrown around. And it seems like their online personalities, just judging by how everyone else is reacting to them, it's like everyone in this digital room knows exactly who's who. So what can you tell us about how that dynamic works?
Well, it's a really good example of how social hierarchies, the kind we usually think about in the offline world, they're actually replicated online. And not only are they replicated, they're amplified in these digital spaces. The transcript we're looking at shows us how certain users, and it seems to be based on how popular they are, how much influence they have, even just how loud they are, they hold a certain like sway over the entire conversation and everyone else who's there.
Okay, so it's like their online clout. It basically gives them social capital. They can steer the conversation, like bring people in, push people out. They have that kind of power.
Exactly. And we see them using this influence in a bunch of different ways. Like demanding that other people join the space, trying to control who gets to talk. And this is kind of disturbing, even going so far as to pressure each other into saying offensive things just for shock value.
That reminds me of that one part. Things get really intense when some of these users, they try to like goad Sam Bond into saying a racial slur. And there are some people, they're egging him on, but then you can hear other people who sound really uncomfortable with it. It's just wild how quickly things go from like lighthearted jokes to something so dark.
Yeah, this incident, which we'll probably call the N-word incident, just to be clear, this is about way more than just a group of people behaving badly. What it does is it really lays bare just how complex these issues of online disinhibition are: peer pressure and the fact that there are real consequences that come from what you do online.
Hold on, for those of us who've never heard that term before, can you break down what online disinhibition even means, like in this context?
Oh, sure. Online disinhibition, it's basically the tendency people have to say and do things online that they would never even dream of doing if they were face-to-face with someone. It all comes down to this feeling of anonymity, the fact that they don't think there will be any immediate consequences, and that can lead to people kind of letting go of their inhibitions a little, or a lot, really.
So in this Twitter space, is it that the anonymity combined with everyone else, like the peer pressure?
Yeah.
Is that what created this situation where saying something super offensive, even if it's just for shock value, became something that's just, I don't know, accepted?
Precisely. And what's even more concerning is how casually this offensive language is used.
Yeah.
It really highlights this dangerous trend where the weight of these words that have real-world historical and social consequences, it's like that weight disappears in these digital spaces.
It really makes you think about what's motivating people to behave this way online, Is it just because they're anonymous, or is there more to it than that?
Well, that's a really complex question, and there are no easy answers. But there is research that suggests a few things might be contributing. The desire for attention, the need to fit in with a group, even if that means ignoring your own personal values, and this blurring of the lines between someone's online persona and their sense of morality in the real world.
So it's like they're playing characters, putting on a show because there's a digital audience, and somewhere along the way, they can't tell the difference between the performance and reality anymore.
Exactly. And this blurring of lines has some very real implications, especially when it comes to issues like misogyny, which is another really concerning theme that comes up in this Twitter space. Yeah, it's like it's woven into the whole conversation. Often it's disguised as humor, like they're just joking around.
Oh, right, like that question they asked Blurry about Kaylin.
Exactly. On the surface, it seems like a harmless joke, but when you really listen to it...
Yeah, there's something else going on there.
There's this really disturbing undercurrent of objectification, and disrespect.
It's like they're using humor to mask these actually really harmful attitudes towards women.
Yes, and it's not just that one comment. It's like a recurring thing throughout the entire recording.
Yeah, you're right. It keeps popping up.
Consistently.
Hmm.
The language they use to describe women, it's demeaning. They're reducing them to objects, like they were there to be.
Conquered.
Yeah, exactly. Not treated like actual people.
It's a good reminder of how ingrained misogyny is, especially in these online communities where it's mostly younger guys.
Absolutely. And what's alarming is how casual it all seems.
It's like they don't even realize, or maybe they don't care.
Right. They go from talking about their Twitch stats straight into making these crude comments about a woman's appearance, all in the same breath.
It's like those two worlds, the online one and the offline one, they're crashing into each other.
And the rules, the social rules we have for the real world, they don't seem to apply online.
Which is pretty concerning when you think about it.
It is. This normalization of toxic behavior is really worrying.
Because it creates an environment where that kind of language is just accepted.
Exactly.
And it might even seem funny to some people.
Which just desensitizes everyone, the people participating, anyone listening. It's a problem.
So we've got this mix of things happening, this online disinhibition, the pressure to go along with the group, and this constant need to outdo each other. And it's all happening in a culture where this kind of behavior isn't just allowed, it's encouraged.
Right, and that makes you wonder about the long-term impact, if this is how people are interacting online.
What does that say about how they treat people face-to-face, in the real world?
That's the question, isn't it? And while it's impossible to say for sure, to say there's a direct link,
Okay, sure.
there's research on what they call the spillover effect. And it suggests that how we behave online can actually influence our attitudes and actions offline.
It's like what you do online leads into how you act in the real world.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not that everyone in that space necessarily agrees with all the offensive language and the misogynistic comments.
But they're not exactly condemning it either.
Exactly. The pressure to conform, to fit in, it's really powerful, especially in those online spaces where social status is everything.
Because if you go against the group,
You risk being ostracized, ridiculed. Nobody wants that.
which brings us back to the N-word incident.
Right. And it wasn't just about one person saying something racist. It was about the pressure Sam Bond was under to conform, to prove that he was one of the guys, even if it meant betraying his own values.
Exactly. The transcript gives us a glimpse into how group dynamics work, especially online. There's a term for it in psychology, the social identity model of de-individuation effects, psych-side for short.
Gotcha.
Basically, when people feel anonymous, like they won't be held accountable for their actions.
They become de-individuated.
Right, and they're more likely to just go along with whatever the group is doing, even if it goes against their own personal beliefs.
So less about individual prejudice, more about the group mentality taking over. Precisely. And this incident with Sam Bond, it's not an isolated case, unfortunately. Later on in the Twitter space, there's that whole thing with Paradox.
Oh, right.
From what we can tell, his account was penalized, which could even affect his income, all because of something he said in this online space.
Wow. That's a really stark reminder that even though it's the internet, there are still consequences to your actions.
Yes, it shows that online spaces, even if they seem separate from the real world, are really deeply intertwined with it. What we do and say online, it can have real-world repercussions.
And it makes sense because these online platforms, they're not just for fun anymore. They're a huge part of our social lives, our careers, even our identities.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual actions either. Think about how the power dynamics in this Twitter space end up having real-world consequences, like with Cheezer and how many followers he has, how established he is online.
He has a lot of influence.
Exactly. And he's basically dictating who can join the space, who's allowed to speak, and that means he's deciding who is exposed to these potentially harmful behaviors.
He's like the gatekeeper, and everyone else is just trying to get on his good side or avoid getting on his bad side.
It's a really good way to put it. And it creates this volatile atmosphere, like you never know what's going to happen next.
It's all very unpredictable.
Yes. And this recording really shows how curated online identity and interaction really is.
Because on the surface, it all seems so chaotic and spontaneous, but you're saying it's not.
Well, underneath all of that, there's this constant jockeying for position, for validation. Everyone is trying to get ahead, but they're also trying to avoid getting muted, blocked, or even banned.
So even in these online spaces where everyone talks about freedom and connection, there's still a lot of control.
A lot of control. And it's not always overt or intentional. Sometimes it's subtle, like who gets amplified, whose jokes get laughed at, who gets invited to the next conversation.
It's like high school all over again.
In a way, yes. It's this constant negotiation of power and influence, and it's happening in real time.
And that takes us to that part at the end where everyone suddenly jumps over to Aiden's space.
Right, like the party just moved to another room.
And no one wants to be left out.
Precisely. It just highlights how fleeting attention is in these spaces. Popularity is constantly shifting, and they're always looking for the next opportunity to be seen and to connect, even if it means abandoning one conversation for another.
It's like that fear of missing out, the fear of being irrelevant. It's more powerful than any loyalty to the people they're talking to at the moment. It's interesting, but also kind of sad.
Yes, it is.
It's tempting to just brush this all off, like it's just the internet, people goofing off, no harm done. But after listening to this Twitter Space recording,
Oh, yeah.
it's obvious there's something bigger happening here. So, if our listener could only take away one thing from this deep dive, what would you want it to be? What's the most important message?
You're hitting on something important. This isn't just meaningless online noise. This Twitter space, we see these raw conversations, right? And it's like a little window into these bigger societal issues.
It's true. It's like a microcosm or something.
Exactly. The need to fit in, the risks that come with being anonymous online, and then, how something that seems harmless online can actually have real consequences. It really makes you think about the connection, the blur between what we do digitally and how it plays out in the physical world. And ultimately, it's about responsibility.
Yeah, it makes you stop and think about your own behavior online, that's for sure. I know I'm going to be way more careful about the words I use, even when I'm just joking around with friends, just because of everything we've talked about.
I think that's a really powerful takeaway,
Yeah.
honestly, because it's not about pointing fingers at specific people or platforms.
Right.
It's about realizing that online spaces are just an extension of our social lives.
They don't exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. So they need the same kind of critical thinking, empathy, the same responsibility we strive for in the real world.
So even with all its complexities, with everything going on in the digital world, it still comes down to basic human interaction.
It does.
And it's our responsibility, all of us, to make those spaces safe and respectful, a place where everyone feels like they can share their voice. Well, that was pretty insightful, even if I do say so myself. Big thanks to you for taking this deep dive with us, and for everyone listening, make sure you join us next time when we'll be exploring another fascinating corner of the digital world. See you then.